Hello and welcome to this new episode of the Periscope of the Unusual. Today I'm going to talk about a topic concerning the Bugarach Peak. I'm going to reveal things to you that I've kept to myself for over 30 years and that I haven't shared with anyone until now. But I think it's time for me to share them, at least for now. So the Bugarach Peak is known for quite a lot of people because there are all sorts of, let's say, stories and legends circulating about it. We know that there have indeed been manifestations observed there. It's located in the Aude, in the department of Aude, in the south of Aude. It's the highest peak in the Corbière, exactly. Its altitude is 1,230 meters, as far as I know. I went there for years, at least twice a year. For pleasure, because it's a beautiful region. There are the Galamus Gorges not far away. There's Rennes-les-Bains, which I love. It's an extraordinary place. And then there's the atmosphere. I really like that area. I'm going to explain to you in detail what I personally experienced and what was generously shared with me. And then I will subsequently talk about, right behind you, the magnificent and renowned painting by Nicolas Poussin, which is famously known as the Shepherds of Arcadia. In fact, I haven't been back to Bugarach, that small, intriguing village, since exactly December 12, 2012, which was the precise date when the ancient Mayan calendar supposedly predicted the catastrophic end of the entire world. Consequently, a very large number of curious people traveled to Bugarach, firmly believing that a mysterious flying saucer, perhaps an extraterrestrial vessel, would appear there to rescue them from the impending global catastrophe. Would consider them the chosen ones and take them away that day to who knows what destination or paradise, etc. I remember that on that famous December 12, 2012, I was in a cabaret with some friends, and since it might as well have been the end of the world, we threw a really big party, and there was no end of the world. It's not because, let's say, you pray facing the sun, or do sun salutations, or play the didgeridoo on the mount or peak of Bugarach, that you'll automatically find yourself sucked up by a flying saucer and taken away like the chosen ones. So all of that is a kind of spiritual adolescence in a way. Well, it's amusing. Let's move on from this topic. So as I was saying, I used to go there regularly. Things happened that I was able to observe, and I had witnesses with me. In other words, I wasn't the only one who saw them. One day, I decided with two friends to climb the peak of Bugarach on December 24th, Christmas Eve, right in the middle of winter. You should know that at the time. Very few people knew about the Pic de Bugarach, and very few people went there. It wasn't a place that, like now, has become a bit more touristy. It was much quieter back then. So we arrived very early in the morning at the foot of the peak and started to climb. It was, let's say, the middle of winter. It was terribly cold. There was an icy crosswind, but the sky was a sparkling blue. It's that blue you only see in winter. Everything was strikingly intense. It was so cold, in fact, that the frost, because of the crosswind, was lying horizontally on the plants, just to give you an idea of how cold it was. So we begin our ascent, and as we steadily make our way upwards, there are several distinct stages to this challenging climb. I particularly enjoy stopping at a specific spot that's quite like a natural platform, situated approximately halfway up the entire route. And there we chat, we take our time, we enjoy the view, and then we see someone coming. A man. Wearing a green jumpsuit, dark green, kind of military looking, but he wasn't actually military, and he had a small backpack. He was a redhead with neatly trimmed hair and a well-groomed red beard. He walked past us and we greeted each other, gave a little wave, and then we keep chatting. We turn our heads for 3 or 4 minutes, barely even that. And we see the guy already reaching the top. It was like gravity didn't apply to him. That is to say, it was as if he wasn't even touching the ground. He reached the top 3 minutes later. It was totally incomprehensible. We looked at each other and straightened up. Well, we finished climbing and got to the top of the Bugarach. And this gentleman was waiting for us with 3 cups of hot tea. So we drank the tea, we tried to communicate, but he didn't speak French or English. He spoke some kind of Germanic language that we didn't understand either, but actually through gestures, we greeted each other, thanked him for the nice hot tea and so on. And we left him there and we headed back down. The descent takes a little while because it's really steep, and it was dangerous because of the ice and frost. It was very slippery. When we got to the bottom, we had left our car there, and there was a white car parked next to us. It had Austrian license plates. What was this guy from Austria doing here on December 24th, Christmas Eve, climbing the Bugarach all alone when it was a place that was little known at the time? And above all, it was the way he climbed it. Gravity didn't seem to affect him. It looked like he was climbing, but it was pretty incredible. It left us a bit perplexed. That's the first thing I was able to observe concretely in the summer of '03. And one day I decided to go sleep on the peak of Bugarach. He spent 2 nights camping with a tent. I went there with someone. I remember very well, it was August 8th and 9th. Why do I remember? Because it was St. Dominic's Day, August 8th, and my name is Dominic, so I remember it very well. And it worked out well because on that date there was a full moon, so we could enjoy really the nighttime light in the mountains. It was really nice. We set up the tent, not at the summit, but about halfway up the peak. The first night was absolute paradise, I mean pure ecstasy. It was beautiful, the weather was nice, there were insects singing, birds singing at night. It was extraordinary, such a sense of well-being, we slept well, everything was perfect. The second night, if the first night was like this, the second night was like that. We had gone, let's say, from day to night, or from white to black, or from black to white. The second night we thought we'll have another comfortable night, our last one, we'll enjoy the nice weather, we'll make the most of it all. All of a sudden, around 11:30 at night, we were in the tent and then everything stopped. Suddenly, in an instant, all the birds, insects and animals stopped making noise, stopped singing and so on. Just like that, nothing, not a sound. A total silence. But it wasn't a normal silence. Something very strange. Surprised, I stuck my head out of the tent and saw shapes. Everything was dark, running along the ridges. But quickly, the person who was with me in the tent started to have a panic attack, feeling very, very unwell, experiencing an overwhelming fear. I had to calm her down and try to get her to fall asleep so she would be soothed. As for me, I stayed awake. And then I suddenly felt something all around the tent. There were presences, but not at all friendly ones, really not friendly at all. That is to say, I had this kind of message in my head telling me, don't go out or you're dead. I truly felt like my life was in danger. I can say it. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. I've been in haunted houses, I've seen some pretty intense things, but this time, honestly, it was enough to turn your hair white. It was really something else. So I didn't move. I obeyed that sort of command that was coming into my head. And then, all of a sudden, I hear sounds like some kind of machinery, like a printing press. Broom, 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 like a printing press. And the ground started to tremble gently. It was particularly impressive, really impressive. It lasted until about 4 in the morning, around 4:30. And then everything stopped all at once. And at that moment, all the insects, the birds, everything started chirping, singing, just going about their lives again. But during the whole period that it was, while this episode was happening, there wasn't a single sound anywhere. When I say not a single sound, it was more than just silence. It was really astonishing. So the next morning, I had barely slept. We got up. The person who was with me had had a pretty normal night, and we went back down. And when we got downstairs, I don't know if it was just a coincidence or if it was a moment of enchantment, something really, really strange. A cloud of butterflies, tiny blue butterflies, but a cloud about 2 to 3 meters in diameter, let's say, came over us and moved along with us. So we were inside this cloud of little blue butterflies. So maybe it has nothing to do with what I experienced the previous year, but I felt like maybe it was a thank you or something like that. Actually, it was of such remarkable and truly incredible gentleness. That's where I leave this adventure. I did have a witness after all. I know what I experienced. I experienced it for real. And I talked about it with some people and they told me, we know a man who experienced the same things as you. His name is Jean Derigny and he lives not far from the Pic de Bugarach, about 6 or 7 kilometers away. Maybe it would be good for you to meet him. I said, okay, I'll go meet him. And they gave me the address. And I showed up at his place unannounced, without warning him beforehand that I was coming to visit. And there I was greeted by a very elderly man and his wife. I was at his gate, and I explained to him that I had experienced this on the Pic de Bugarach. I was told that you had experienced the same thing. And then he let me in, and I was welcomed in a very, very pleasant way by these two people with his wife. Very, very gentle, very kind. So I repeat, I explained to him what happened to me. And then he explained to me what happened to him. In the 1960s, at the end of the 60s, he also slept on the Pic de Bugarach and he heard those sounds, exactly what I experienced, he experienced too. This man was originally an engineer who had traveled and who had come to this region and, as if drawn to it, had bought an old farmhouse whose foundations dated back, let's say, to Saint-Benoît, meaning the foundations were from an old Benedictine abbey. You should know that St. Benedict was the first of all the monks, and that dates back to the 6th century, so the foundations of this house were very old. After talking about what he had experienced and what I had experienced, here is what he said to me. He told me that in the late 1960s, as an engineer, he was able to witness those noises on the Bugarach, and he wanted to record them. So he didn't have a recording device, but he had a friend in the United States who brought over a device that was actually used by NASA to capture some rather unusual sounds, I'm not exactly sure, and he made audio tapes of those sounds where you can hear these kinds of regular machinery noises as if it were a printing press. You know, those 4-color printing presses, those big machines running, it sounded pretty much the same. And at the time, he talked about it here and there to the press, and journalists came. But from everywhere, journalists came from Paris, from all over, TV crews and so on. They all showed up to hear what he had to say and so on. And then suddenly, the police arrived, and they cleared out all the journalists, forbidding them to interview him, forbidding them to film, and so on. Surprising. So that's where it ended, the videotapes. I know them. Well, those people have passed away now, and I don't know what happened to those videotapes. And then I talked a bit more with this gentleman, and he told me, you see, I am a student of Master Philippe of Lyon. So I was, let's say, made aware of certain things and so on. And I said to him, but what's there under the Bugarach? Why? What is this machinery? And here's what he told me. What I'm about to reveal to you, you don't have to believe it. I'm just repeating what was confided to me. He told me, in fact, underneath there is a base, let's say, of beings who are not from our planet. They have been there for 4 million years, which is roughly the time when the interglacial period began. Beneath there is a kind of dome that sends information out into space. It's about 2 square kilometers. And this dome sends information into space toward the constellation of the Pleiades. So he tells me, there are Pleiadians underneath who have been there for a very, very, very long time. And I say to him, oh, really? Okay, very well. But what are these Pleiadians like? Are they cool? Are they not cool? No, they tell me they're not cool. That is, they're there, you shouldn't bother them, but they're not particularly cool at all, actually. That is to say, you shouldn't bother them, I repeat. But at the same time, for those who, let's say, might be tempted or who manage to access their possible underground base, they will never return because they will be systematically eliminated. That's what he told me. So actually, it's a place that might be special, but we shouldn't disturb them. That's what I was told. And I can guarantee you that, having witnessed what I experienced that night where I was, it was terrifying. Really, you had to hold on tight. And I know I'm not someone who gives up easily. But even so, it was really, 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 really intense. Both very hot and very cold at the same time. It was more cold than hot. It was freezing. And then we parted ways with this gentleman. I went to see him again twice. And then after that, we lost touch because then on the peak of Bugarach, same thing. This person passed away. I won't give his name. He was someone who worked for the French services, but the services, someone in particular who dealt with state secrets and who told me that the day Mitterrand was elected in 1981, he had, according to what he told me, forbidden planes, even military planes, from flying over the peak of Bugarach. Back then, I remember when I was there, I used to go up with my phone, and there was no signal at all, and then the compass would spin one way and then the other. Supposedly, there's a lot of magnetite there at the same time, and I'm willing to believe it. And this gentleman also confided to me that Mitterrand, so it was around January 5th or 6th, some years, discreetly, a helicopter or something like that would drop him off at the foot of the Bugarach, and he would disappear for an hour or two or three. No one followed him, and he would come back, not saying a word. That's what I have to say, and what I've kept to myself for about 35 years. To finish, we're going to talk about this, about the famous painting by Nicolas Poussin that was painted in 1638 in the early part of the 17th century, and we're going to talk about it right now. So, as promised, I mentioned earlier this famous painting by Nicolas Poussin called The Shepherds of Arcadia. Nicolas Poussin was a truly influential 17th century French painter, and this particular painting was meticulously made, I firmly believe, in the year 1638, or perhaps around that specific period of time. And these Shepherds of Arcadia, a painting that's actually in the Louvre, has sparked a lot of ink to be spilled, especially among those searching for things that are a bit hidden, mysterious, occult, and so on. I have read in various academic and art history books that were published approximately 15 years ago, or perhaps even a little more recently, some rather definitive conclusions about this particular painting, specifically stating that it was widely believed to have represented a tomb or a funerary monument, specifically the tomb of Jesus, of Christ, who would supposedly be buried in the region, in the Corbière, far from the peak of Bugarach. I don't really subscribe to this theory. I'll tell you the reasons why. There are at least two. The first is that nothing indicates that this is a tomb with the name Jesus on it. Next, nothing indicates that it's even a tomb at all. That's it. On the other hand, when you look closely at what's written, it says "it in Arcadia," which means in Latin translation and also in Arcadia. I'll talk to you about Arcadia in a moment. So, he painted this painting with 4 shepherds. He calls them shepherds. For me personally, I have a hard time seeing this person as a shepherd. Well, why not? But what's interesting about this painting, actually, is that you have to look at the background. And there, indeed, it's the depiction of the peak of Bugarach, which was painted, this depiction, from the southeast side. You climb up from that side, and actually here we're near the gorges of Galamus, which continue in that direction on the other side. So here we're clearly looking at the peak of Bugarach, and these shepherds of Arcadia are pointing to this inscription. You have to look at it closely, where it says, I repeat, et in Arcadia ego. Arcadia. Well, I celebrated my 20th birthday in Greece. I stayed there, worked for almost a year. I worked for a diplomat. I was in a somewhat diplomatic environment, so I traveled all over Greece with a vehicle, with green plates, with a diplomatic car. And I didn't really visit the islands, but I traveled across Greece from north to south, from Macedonia through Chalkidiki, Thessaly, Mount Parnassus. And it's an absolutely wonderful country. The Greeks are fantastic people. And I wish for anyone one day to have the chance in the month of May, because it's the best season, to be at the foot of Mount Olympus at 9 a.m. when the sun has risen, and to look at that mountain, and then you can understand why the ancients said it was the home of the gods. It's extraordinary. The Adriatic Sea, the colors you find in Greece that have always inspired poets, they're unique. It's a wonderful country with people who are absolutely kind, extraordinary. I would have a lot to say about what I saw there, but, well, let's stick to this painting for now. So, the region of Arcadia is located in the Peloponnese. In the center of the Peloponnese, in a way to the north of Kalamata. So, Kalamata is a city I know well, and they make very good olives there, by the way, and also to the north of Sparta, near a city called Tripoli. So it's a region. So what does that tell us? Is it an Arcadia ego? So this building, we don't know. It emerges, but we don't know if it's underground. At the same time, we don't know if it's not, let's say, a kind of resurgence of something that extends, that is much larger underneath. And Nicolas Poussin has depicted here, truly, I think, the peak of Bugarach. But in fact, the most important thing is Arcadia ego. By following this finger, we come back to this part here, which strangely is more illuminated in white than the other parts of the painting. And that could indicate, in fact, the place where in Arcadia the same underground installation would be located as the one I explained to you earlier, beneath the peak of Bugarach. However, when you observe it closely, this particular mountain appears quite strange, possessing a distinct and expansive plateau right on its very top. However, 10 years later, Nicolas Poussin painted the same painting again. Almost the same one, so 10 years later. So was it a commission, or was he rather someone who was initiated? We'll try to figure that out. 10 years later, he painted this painting again. Well, 10 years later, the colors are a bit more vibrant, etc. But if you look closely, it's exactly the same in terms of composition. The four characters, this woman here, you find her there as well. The tomb, the hands placed exactly the same way, and the same mountain in the background. He could have painted a different mountain, but it really looks like the peak of Bugarach, because when you reach the summit, you're on a steep cliff here. But the difference with this painting was that since he was talking about Arcadia, which was thought to be another site with an underground base, he had written here, and then all of a sudden, 10 years later, he paints a different mountain, which is much more precise than this one. So, I could be wrong. I'm not someone who knows everything. I'm someone who makes mistakes. It's not a problem. But still, let's note that this painting here shows a much more precise work. And it might be interesting to go to Arcadia, perhaps, to find, let's say, the mountain in Arcadia, because it's obviously a mountainous region, which would have the same appearance as this, and we would have the answer that also in Arcadia, being an equal Arcadia, we have another underground base that would be more or less the same as that of the Pic de Bugarach, which is just below here. So everyone will draw their own conclusions. That suit them, of course. As for me, I'm done with this video. I hope I didn't bore you. I don't know if everything I said is true. I'm not here to try to convince or manipulate you. I'm just trying to share information with you that I've kept to myself for a very, very long time. And I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video if you wish. That's it. In the meantime, I wish you all the best.